I don't remember where I read it, but I recall something Louis Ginsberg once said. According to Jewish legend, wrote Ginsberg, God had trouble getting Moses' attention in the wilderness because Moses was so intent on looking after his father-in-law's sheep. It wasn't anything bad that kept him from noticing God. It was something good, his duty to his work. So God had to set a bush on fire and then keep it from being consumed in order to get Moses' attention and make him realize he was in the presence of holiness. I wonder how often some of us miss the most important things in life, the most magical things, because we're so preoccupied with doing our duty. I know I'm guilty, and I expect you are too. We're taught from childhood to be responsible, to pay attention to our work. And then both in school and in the market, we are rewarded for focusing on our jobs, for keeping our noses to the grindstone. We admire people who do this. We wish we were more like them. We advise our children to study their habits. We celebrate work and devotion to work. But what about the person who has become devoted to work and duty? Is it possible that such single-mindedness can lead to a kind of life deprivation, if we can call it that? Can we become so focused on what we are supposed to be doing that we actually miss a lot of the joy and wonder of life around us? This was the point of Charles Dickens's portrait of Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, wasn't it? Scrooge didn't start out as a bad man. He was simply the product of a society that rewarded devotion to business, spending all one's hours at one's desk, watching where the money went and being sure it was well accounted for. Later, when Scrooge had that vision of his earlier life and his engagement to a lovely young woman, he realized he had lost her because of his obsession with work and business. In fact, he almost lost everything because of this obsession. And only that miraculous evening with the three ghosts of Christmas restored him to his true sensibilities and saved him from eternal despair and damnation. And it isn't only business people who suffer from such a punitive narrowing of interests. There are doctors, lawyers, judges, teachers, office managers, truck drivers, even housewives, who become so completely dominated by their work and their duties that they lose all sense of wonder and magic. I even know a minister who was always so busy that once his little son went to his secretary and made an appointment to see him. It shamed the minister, he confessed, but he was later made a bishop, so I don't know if he learned anything or not. In fact, that actually may say something about how we reward people for working hard and ignoring some of the most important things in their lives. Children. Children are born seeing the world as magical and wonderful. And I hate to say it, but we train them out of it. When they're small, the world is almost totally miraculous. I watched a little girl at a wedding recently. The bride and groom had provided their guests with small containers of bubble solution so that the air would be shimmering with bubbles as they climbed into their wedding carriage. Someone had given a bottle, one of these small bottles, to the little girl, who appeared to be about 4 years old. From the look on her face as she made a bubble, I would have said that she was beholding the creation of the world or looking with astonishment at the mysteries of the ages. It was absolutely rapt. None of the adults around her were as ecstatic as she was. They had other things on their minds, whether their hats were on straight or they still had enough lipstick on or were getting the right angles on their photographs. But she was gazing at the burning bush. She was turning aside to see what made bubbles and why they shimmered and floated in the air and what the breeze did to them when it caught them and where they went when they broke. Our problem is, as someone has said, that at some point the world becomes merely to us. M-E-R-E-L-Y, merely. We cease to see the wonder. We go to school and are made to color within the lines and learn to conjugate verbs and dissect frogs and calculate sums. And somewhere in the process, we stop expecting burning bushes because life is plain and serious and demanding, and we have to pay attention to our work, not the wonder of things. It would be all right if we weren't missing so much. I've always thought there was such deep truth in a line from Thornton Wilder's play Our Town. You remember that play, don't you? About Emily, the girl who dies and is given one day to return to her home and see everything again. Emily can see everybody, but they can't see her. And she wanders about for the whole day, cherishing the beauty of everything. Finally, she turns to the stage manager, who's the only person she can talk to, and asks, does anybody ever truly see life while they're living it? The stage manager thinks about this for a moment and then says, the saints and the artists, maybe, they do some. The saints and artists notice the world, some, but not the rest of us. The rest of us are like dutiful old Moses with his sheep. We're too busy with everything to notice. God has to do something really spectacular to get our attention. Now, here's the kicker. The Bible seems to suggest that seeing things, really paying attention to them, the way Moses finally did after he came upon the burning bush, is tantamount to standing in the presence of God. You remember what Isaiah and Jesus both said. You have eyes, but you don't see. You have ears, but you don't hear. Being spiritual, not being religious, mind you, but being spiritual, has to do with seeing and hearing, with paying attention, with truly witnessing the wonder of things. When we become aware of the world, then we're aware of God. But as long as we're insensitive to things, we don't even know God is around, regardless of how religious we are. Certainly Jesus was sensitive to the world around him. He said to those he was teaching, notice the daisies and anemones and cornflowers, how beautiful they are. And they didn't have to do anything to become that way. God simply did it for them. Watch the birds flying around you, the sparrows and the wrens and the little finches. They don't go to college. They don't have high-paying jobs. Yet your Heavenly Father feeds and cares for them. Don't you know He will take care of you? Don't you know God is here? The saints and the artists, He was both. It's so important to learn to notice things because it's the only way to have epiphanies every day. Gerald Kennedy was always one of my favorite preachers. He was a fresh sort of man with a vigorous way of seeing and doing things. When he was Methodist Bishop of Los Angeles, he used to drive around town in a little red sports car. Nobody ever accused Bishop Kennedy of being stuffy. Once Kennedy was on a speaking tour in Australia and was staying in a hotel. One day he stayed in his room to work on his sermon for that evening. But he was distracted by somebody's practicing the violin down the hall. Run after run, arpeggio after arpeggio. That ought not to be allowed in the hotel, he thought. Why, there's no telling how many people it's disturbing. He became more and more incensed. He thought about calling the desk to complain. But about that time, the maid came in to clean his room. Isn't it wonderful, she said. What's wonderful? Asked Kennedy. Yehudi Menuhin, can't you hear him? He's a guest in the hotel, and he's practicing for the big concert tonight. Suddenly, Kennedy realized it was not some upstart student making noises down the hall. It was one of the greatest virtuosos the world had ever known. His whole attitude immediately underwent a radical transformation. He became so enamored of the sounds that he took his chair out into the hall where he could hear better and continued working on his sermon out there. Most of the time, though, he said he forgot to work on the sermon at all and merely basked in the presence of that wonderful genius. I wonder if this isn't a little like noticing things in the world and then becoming aware that God made them? Does it make a difference to be reminded that there's a connection between the marvels we behold around us all the time and the supremely creative one who gave birth to those marvels? Perhaps if we can only learn to see things better and realize what wonder and magic there is in them, our lives will become more spiritual, more attuned to the transcendent in our midst. We'll know that the world is a wonderful place, that it is truly filled with wonder, and that there is no place in it where God isn't present, even in the wilderness, if we can only notice the burning bushes in it. Then maybe we'll pull our chairs out into the hallway and enjoy the concert.